Welcome to Electrified. It's your host, Dylan Loomis. I need to give a big shout out to my guy, my pickleball brother, B. Waz. You know who you are. Just want to say thank you for everything. Super glad we met, and I'm sure I'll be seeing you soon. And I hope that new Model S treats you incredibly well for years to come. And seriously, thank you for being my hype man. I appreciate you. All right, so the current noise when it comes to the SpaceX IPO and Tesla is easily at an all-time high. The markets are selling off, and being a Tesla investor today is very different than it was even just 2 or 3 years ago. At time of recording, Tesla stock is down today almost 7%, and naturally you have plenty of people saying, see, everybody's selling Tesla stock to buy SpaceX, and I'm sure to some degree that's happening. However, guys, let's not forget the NDX currently is down over 4%, and Tesla stock historically has had a beta of between 1.5 and 2.3. So on a day like today with the Nasdaq where it is, Tesla could easily be down 8%, just moving in line with the broader market. So frankly, there might be nothing specific going on with Tesla stock. It's just the overall markets are dumping. As I always say, it's usually more than just one thing, but at this point, better than expected labor market data likely means the Federal Reserve's move will be more tightening than it will be loosening, which means higher rates for longer, which is worse for longer duration companies like Tesla. But yeah, of course, there's way more to the story. There are some serious questions right now about the ROI of all of this AI compute spend. Topic for another day. I just wanted to say what's happening with Tesla stock today doesn't have that much to do with Tesla's fundamental business. And I just want to be fully transparent. I'm not selling any Tesla stock for the SpaceX IPO. I have requested some SpaceX shares through Fidelity, but definitely not a life-altering amount. I just wanted to go through the process really out of curiosity to see if I would get approved for any shares, and really just to have some skin in the game until a potential merger with Tesla. And the last thing I want to say, I've been thinking about this so much, I am very confident Elon is not going to let Tesla shareholders draw the short straw when it comes to that potential merger, acquisition, whatever it is. Of course, it all boils down to valuations at the time, but if SpaceX is the company acquiring Tesla, I'm very confident the offer SpaceX will make to ultimately buy Tesla will be one that does right by Tesla shareholders, even if it happens before Tesla actually scales up the robotaxi ramp in earnest. So obviously not that we should just write off the merger as it's only good. We should definitely understand what's happening if it happens. But I just want to say I think the fears that Tesla shareholders are going to somehow be screwed, for lack of a better term, are indeed a bit overblown. But of course, we will cross that bridge if and when it comes. The response was overwhelming last time, so I feel like I need to mention it one more time. Chesed Chicago, the sponsor of this video, is running its 12th annual Tesla raffle, meaning if you enter, you'll give yourself the chance to win a brand new Tesla or a Rivian, a Lucid, or even $50,000 in cash. And there will only be 9,999 tickets sold, which is better for your odds. And if you go to their page, you can see an interview with the winner from last year and a list of all of the past winners. And yes, I did verify their nonprofit status and their EIN. And I chose to work with Chesed not only because I know Teslas are still out of reach for a lot of people, and I think it would be a really cool story if one of you guys won, but it really does seem like they're doing some great work in Chicago. They support families in crisis through 80 plus different life-saving programs, from food and furniture to medical equipment and assistance, education and mentoring, job placement, and a whole lot more, serving the local community. And again, once that number of tickets are sold or the drawing date hits, that's a wrap and no further entries will be accepted. And this year you can supercharge your tickets so you can win the car and a home EV charger fully installed on them. So if you want to have some fun and do some good, just head to ccraffle.com and use code Electrified to get $25 off 2 tickets or $500 off 15. Again, that's ccraffle.com and code Electrified. Best of luck. In this recent interview where Jamie Dimon from JP Morgan talked to Elon, Elon said 2 things that I think really need explaining. Point 1, these orbital data centers in space will be easier than what SpaceX is doing with Starlink V3 and those satellites. So comparing orbital data centers to Starlink V3, Elon said the former will be much easier. His rationale, the orbital data centers are really just solar paired with radiators, and those laser links that then ultimately communicate with the Starlink communication system. And then it's actually Starlink that will communicate with the ground through those radio frequencies, because those can actually get through clouds and even roofs in some instances, as Elon said. So the orbital data centers will be piggybacking off the V3 Starlink satellites for communicating to the ground. So Starlink V3 from an engineering standpoint really is a monster. It has to do real-time radio beam forming to thousands of customers around the world, some of which are on the move as these satellites fly across the sky. On the other hand, these AI compute satellites won't have to communicate with the ground. Again, it's just the solar for power, the radiators to get rid of the heat, and the laser link to hand all of that data to the Starlink system that will then communicate with the ground. So from that standpoint, the actual difficult problem, the communication part, is already handled with Starlink. But as we've learned over the years, we now need to ask the question more often: how much credibility does Elon have with statements like this? He himself often says he is rather optimistic. And the main counterpoint from the skeptics is the radiation part. And boiling it down, the main argument is that the size the radiator would need to be would be prohibitive and ultimately would change the launch economics, making the entire project less favorable. But I think the point people are missing is that SpaceX has already filed with the SEC for up to 1 million smaller AI satellites. Said another way, SpaceX plans to spread all of this compute thin in space rather than having a smaller number of bigger AI data centers in space. So obviously, if each satellite has less compute, then it needs to radiate less heat. So SpaceX distributing that compute should really help to ease some of the cooling problems by not having it so concentrated. But again, there are trade-offs. If you solve or ease for the thermal problem and the radiation, doing it that way can bring up some launch mass and economic challenges. So the argument goes, SpaceX can't beat physics, they're ultimately just relocating what the bottleneck is. But it's just a fact. No one on planet Earth knows better than Elon and the team of engineers at SpaceX what's possible and what's not. So to me, it seems like the most likely outcome is they are going to make this work. They are so heavily going this direction, it just might be on a slightly longer timeline than they're saying and expecting. And you guys know we've seen the exact same thing from Tesla. Making the impossible merely late. SpaceX will likely do the same thing. Now, point 2, I'm going to play for you because Elon had a slip of tongue, and I'll let you be the judge of if it's worth anything.
So we do intend with our SpaceX AI satellites to allow people to put whatever GPU or TPU they want. So if NVIDIA GPUs can be put on it, Google TPUs can be put on it, Amazon Trainiums, or any other chips that people want to put on can be put on. We will also offer our chips in the future, and I think we also want to offer our software, our AI software as well in the future. But it will be such that you can run anyone's AI hardware or software on the Tesla AI satellite, SpaceX AI satellites. Yeah. Right.
So the next.
Tesla AI satellites. It wasn't just a mistake. Tesla's making solar for space. Tesla will be making AI 678, some of which will be for space. But as I keep saying, it will be that way and the synergies will exist even if there's no merger. But far and away, the big takeaway here is Elon clarified these AI satellites SpaceX will launch are going to be chip agnostic, meaning any and all hyperscalers with their own chips will be able to hitch a ride on a SpaceX rocket. So in the early days, SpaceX might be providing the power and the cooling and the laser network and the communication. So companies like Google or Amazon with their own chips can plug those into one of SpaceX's AI satellites, send them up, and then ultimately pay SpaceX not only for the launch, but on an ongoing basis because they're effectively renting out the infrastructure that SpaceX provides. And sure, over time, there will be other companies launching rockets into space, but at this point, SpaceX is far and away the dominant player. So any competition that wants data centers in space, and hint hint, if they are actually the economically superior way, then everybody is going to want that. That means the competition will have to flow through SpaceX. But again, the reason this is all so fascinating is because there are valid counterpoints. In this case, just one of them is a lot of these competitors' AI compute chips are not radiation hardened. And as we know, it's not the easiest thing ever to send a tech out into space to swap out a dead chip. So we should expect the lifespan of these chips to be shorter in space. And over time, these chips are going to need to raise their game to have these space grade standards to hold up to all of that radiation beating that they will take. And at this point, I think this could play out one of two ways. Option A would be SpaceX acting like the trucking company, where a company like Google does successfully develop its own AI satellite that it only pays SpaceX to launch into orbit. Meaning Google might have its own TPUs and its own solar and its own communication network and its own cooling design. So under that model, SpaceX would basically get a one-time payment for the ride into orbit, aka for the launch. And that's precisely what Google's Project Suncatcher actually is. In their blog post, they said it's our new research moonshot to one day scale machine learning in space. We're exploring how an interconnected network of solar-powered satellites equipped with their TPU AI chips could harness the full power of the sun. And they said our next step is a learning mission in partnership with Planet to launch 2 prototype satellites by early 2027 that will test our hardware in orbit. But let's say Google and others are not successful right away in those endeavors. That would lead to SpaceX and option B, meaning SpaceX builds and operates the actual satellites, the solar, the radiators, the communication, and so on, and these customers like Google rent the capacity from SpaceX. So ultimately, they're just paying for compute time similar to AWS. So financially for SpaceX, how well they can do will to some degree depend on how much of that stack and how many of those layers they can actually capture. But the beauty of capitalism is that companies like Google and Amazon and others are going to want to have as much vertically integrated on their own as they can. They're not going to want to pay SpaceX more than they have to. But if the radiative cooling aspect is as hard as some are arguing, and SpaceX is the only one to solve it over the next few years, then once again, the competition will have no choice but to go through SpaceX. And just a few other points from that interview, Elon said Starlink V3 satellites will be 10 to 20 times more capable than V2. SpaceX has had 3 different chips taped out for the V3 satellites, which are far beyond state-of-the-art, and they have 100 times more bandwidth than the current Starlink, and roughly half the latency because the altitude will be half. And yes, Elon mentioned that robots like Optimus will require massive bandwidth. So I don't want to get over my skis, but there's a world where Starlink and Optimus are integrated more than we may have thought. Because Elon brought up Optimus right after he was done explaining the bandwidth improvements of the V3 satellites. And Elon said V3 can only be launched on Starship. Starship has a 30-foot diameter cargo bay, and the V3 satellites are roughly 23 feet wide, and they do have bigger phase array antennas and more lasers and more advanced lasers. But ultimately, he said Starship should do around 50 V3 satellites at a time. So again, it doesn't matter what the skeptics say. If Elon and the SpaceX team genuinely believes that the AI satellites will be, relatively speaking, easier than Starlink V3, that would be a huge win and would alleviate a lot of the uncertainty around that project. And then SpaceX offering its AI satellites in a chip-agnostic fashion really opens up a huge market. That I will grant you, there's a lot of uncertainty around, but at least for the early years of these orbital data centers sometime closer to 2030, it's clear as day that SpaceX is positioned incredibly well to be the linchpin for all of its competitors to get its compute into space. And on that point, we got a filing from SpaceX. We entered into a cloud service agreement with Google with respect to compute capacity. This includes about 110,000 NVIDIA GPUs, CPUs, memory, and other related components. Google has agreed to pay SpaceX $920 million per month starting October this year through June 2029, with capacity ramping up through September at a reduced fee. After December 31st this year, the agreement may be terminated by either party upon 90 days notice. $920 million a month is over $11 billion in annual revenue. That that would be added to the Anthropic annual revenue run rate of that contract in the neighborhood of $15 billion. And sure, that one might end up being short term, but again, the point is this compute rental business for SpaceX is a serious needle mover. For context, SpaceX's entire revenue in 2025 was just over $18 billion. And so with two deals from Google and Anthropic, they have exceeded that far and away. And it does not say it in the release, but this is expected to be a portion of Colossus 2 because Anthropic has Colossus 1 on lockdown. And to keep it as simple as possible, if the competition is willing to pay SpaceX for compute on Earth, why wouldn't they be willing to do the same thing in space? Especially if the economics ultimately prove to be superior. And let's not forget the Tesla story. For over a decade, many people were saying, oh, the competition will just do what Tesla did and they're gonna eat their lunch. Well, here we are, and that hasn't happened at all. And right now, many people are making the same argument against SpaceX. Oh, the competition's just gonna do what SpaceX is doing, both for terrestrial data centers and ultimately in orbit. So maybe in time they will, but also maybe they won't. And importantly, if you missed it, the S&P 500 will not be allowing SpaceX early entry into the index. Meaning if SpaceX IPOs this month, the earliest it could be added to the S&P 500 would be June 2027, which of course would delay a lot of that forced index buying. Now, some out there are saying that this delayed inclusion could push the SpaceX and Tesla merger up a bit. Depending on how they actually execute it, SpaceX could be included in the S&P 500 sooner. However, I think this whole thing is really a secondary issue at best. Plenty of companies historically have found plenty of success at IPO without that instant inclusion into the S&P 500. So it's not like missing out on all of that forced buying is going to change the trajectory for SpaceX to any real meaningful degree. And before we move on, I want to share Rob Maurer came out of the woodwork to say, remember a few weeks ago when everyone was saying a 100 times price to sales was crazy for SpaceX, and all of a sudden it's like 39x. Shows how dumb that type of analysis is. That of course quoting the news we just went over about SpaceX's new deal with Google. And in my last video about SpaceX, we talked about exactly this, how big of a deal this compute rental business really is and how much of a needle mover it can be. We just have to keep in mind that 12 months from now, things might look very different because these deals could end up being short-term in nature. Or just as easily, they could end up being multi-year deals. That's part of why it's so hard to figure all of this out because there are so many moving pieces and so much uncertainty. Today, the information said that Tesla is pushing the Roadster demo to August. Frankly, I won't be holding my breath to actually see it in August, but that's the latest. And they said the Roadster will indeed use cold gas thrusters that were co-developed with SpaceX. But we have known that one for quite some time. Tesla's AI team was at CVPR this week. Ashok did give a presentation and he did say the full discussion will be uploaded in a few days. Checking in on the Texas Motor Carrier website for Tesla's robotaxi business, you will now find 51 registered VINs for the service. That number is up from 42 just a few days ago. But again, at any given time, that doesn't mean all 51 vehicles are active in the service, but that's the total number of vehicles currently registered that are able to be deployed. So that number has officially gone up by 9. But anecdotally, we still have reports from people on the ground like Cyber Owl saying 0 unsupervised robotaxis in North Austin since yesterday. This post was on Thursday, but she said her car did have a safety monitor and the car did not have a robotaxi badge. She said there's no change in the long wait times and the pickup and drop off logic still needs work. And further, when it comes to Cybercab deployment, if I could have one question answered, it would be what all is involved in removing the steering wheel and pedals from the Cybercab? Because I would be rather confident saying that Tesla won't deploy a Cybercab with the steering wheel. For that first experience, they'll want it to be as intended, without one. And given that all of the Cybercabs we're seeing in Austin, Houston, and Dallas still have steering wheels, we might be waiting another few weeks before we see one deployed. And further, can the removal of those wheels and pedals be done at any Tesla service location, or can it only be done at certain locations? Or could it be done by mobile service? It doesn't even need a Tesla location. All questions I wish we had answers to. I could guess, but I'd just be speculating. In Belgium, Tesla has officially completed the 5,000 kilometer test for supervised FSD. So with the driving done, the burden now shifts to the administration for its formal advice on homologation. And the mobility minister said, "I'll keep pulling the cart for the fastest possible homologation in Flanders and thus Belgium." There was plenty of chatter today about JP Morgan with a huge Tesla stock upgrade, but the context is critical. Remember, Rajat Gupta took over coverage of Tesla stock from Ryan Brinkman, who was incredibly bearish on Tesla for years. So point one, JP Morgan has a new Tesla stock analyst. JP Morgan's price target went from $145 now up to $475. But listen, Gupta's analysis aside, JP Morgan is part of the underwriting syndicate for SpaceX's IPO, which means JP Morgan has a new incentive to be on good terms with Elon. The fee potential for JP Morgan is quite substantial, and why do you think Jamie Dimon just sat down to interview Elon? So clearly, Jamie Dimon, JP Morgan, Elon, SpaceX, Tesla, they all have a newfound relationship. So look, I'm not saying that's the full reason, I'm just saying I think it's worth pointing out. And ultimately, you can't do any worse than Ryan Brinkman did. So this upgrade is really just JP Morgan moving out of Tesla Q Fantasyland. In a long overdue move from Tesla, finally all Model Y trims sold in North America will come equipped with a black headliner and the bigger 16-inch center touchscreen. So to the gray headliner, sayonara sucker, we will not miss you. And remember, the bigger 16-inch screen is not the only upgrade, it's also better quality. So now we just need those changes to trickle down to the Model 3. And as Sawyer pointed out, E-Trade has a process for IPO share allocation for SpaceX for Tesla shareholders who have held Tesla in their account for at least 10 years. So it's not all platforms, it's not really what we hoped for, and that is a pretty long holding period, but here's Elon's ability to say that, hey, we did do something for longtime Tesla shareholders. Don't forget, check out CC Raffle linked below if you want to do some good and give yourself the chance to win some pretty sweet prizes. Hope you all have a wonderful and a safe weekend, and a huge thank you to all of my Patreon supporters.